Kia ora koutou, assalamu alaikum. It's a really big pleasure of mine to be hosting the Multiethnic Young Leaders Second Speaker and Networking event for 2022. To welcome you into the space, I want to start off with a karakia. Feel free to join me from wherever you are in opening this space up with this karakia. Kia hora te marino, kia whakapapa pounamu te moana, hei hoarahi mā tātou I te rangi nei, aroha atu, aroha mai, tātou I a tātou katoa, hui e, tae ki e. So this karakia is actually welcoming us with well wishes of calm, peace, and for us to come into this space together and really welcoming you into this space. So some of you will have dialed in to the first speaker networking series at the start of the year. It is an opportunity for ethnically diverse future leaders to hear from influential speakers from a diverse range of backgrounds, industries and ethnicities. Speakers have been invited to share their stories and ideas and their leadership journey with multi-ethnic young leaders, members and the wider community of rangatahi in Aotearoa. The 2022 Speaker Networking Series is sponsored by KPMG, so we're in their lovely space. We were just saying what an amazing space we are, so thank you to KPMG for welcoming us into this space as well, and we really acknowledge the KPMG's investment into the multi-ethnic young leaders, mahi and kaupapa. I do also want to acknowledge the land, the mana whenua of this area and the landmarks around us as well. So, ko wai o, who am I? Ko Nurain tako ingoa, no Maldives o ko tipuna e tipu ake au ki Tamaki Makaurau. I've come from, my ancestors come from the small island country of the Maldives, and I've grown up here in Tamaki Makaurau, and I'm really privileged to be facilitating this conversation with an incredible wahine with us today. So we do want to introduce Saunoamaali'i, Dr. Karanina Sumeo. She did ask me to scrap her bio, but I am going to read out a few pieces of her achievements. She is the Equal Opportunities Commissioner at the Human Rights Commission. She is of Samoan descent, originally from the village of Vailima in Upolu, Samoa. Saunoamaali'i has strong commitment to improving equal employment opportunities, particularly bringing that Pacifica perspective to human rights issues in Aotearoa. I was really humbled to see the work that she's done for 20 years as a public advisor and social worker advocating for interests of multiple marginalised communities, and she holds qualifications in social work, social policy, mediation and science, including a PhD in public policy from AUT. So what a privilege to welcome you into this space and speak to you tonight, Saunoamaali'i. Thank you for being here.
Tēnā koe and tēnā koutou. Assalamu alaikum, namaste, ni hao, malole soifua. Thank you for inviting me in today. And yes, thank you to KPMG, who are always very supportive of these types of initiatives. So yeah, lovely to be here.
Thank you. Before we jump into it, I do want to encourage everyone, there will be a Slido available for you to submit any questions. I'm sure you've got some burning questions, things that you want to know, so don't be afraid to put it into the Slido. To participate in the Q&A, you will have to go into slido.com, so that's slido.com, and enter the event code for today. And so if you're ready for the event code, it is 24862. I'm pretty sure it's on the screen or in the chat somewhere as well. So please feel free to reach out to any of our team who's online to help you out as well if you've got that going. Now, for the bit that we've all been waiting for, we'll just jump into it. I do have a few questions to get us started, but I just want to invite you, Saunoamaali'i, to share a little bit of your journey. We were speaking about the diversity of your team and your role as well, so I'd love to hear your story and also the kaupapa that you're involved in, how you got there.
Right. Well, I think a lot of us who are not Indigenous, not tangata whenua here, we share similar stories. We've come over for opportunities. I was brought to New Zealand as a child. I was 10 years old by my grandparents. And I came with a sister of mine. So we started school back home, and then I think I was 10 years old when we got here. And then I stayed here and went to university like others. I was very fortunate to be able to get to university. It was at a time when university was free, which is something that, you know, I hope one day we can go back to that. Because if it wasn't free, children from families like mine would never have made it that far. So that's a real fundamental issue about equal opportunity to life, you know, not just to education, but to improve the quality of life. And it's something that, you know, I see is really needed, especially now, you know, with the impact of COVID. And, you know, a number of our struggling families, you know, they lost jobs. You know, people are worried now about their mortgages with high inflation, interest rates rising up. And so I'm thinking, you know, some of those things that we had in the past, we need to revisit so that we can, you know, become a more equal society going forward. But yeah, so that's my journey. I did my degree in Bachelor of Science as a chemist. I was fascinated by chemistry and chemicals and maths, and I enjoyed the formulas, you know. And then I discovered social work. So I was in a lab, and I read this article about this 2-year-old who was found deceased on a bare mattress. And I later discovered that the 2-year-old was part Samoan. It was the first time I heard the word social work. And by the end of the year, I had left my job as a chemist, industrial chemist, and I went to social work. And from there, my journey went on. And I had my children, and I discovered this thing called policy, social policy. I developed social policy interest. I did my master's and so forth. And then, so that's how I moved through. And like I said, I was fortunate to have been able to afford tertiary education, because then in a way, I created pathways and choices for myself. And my children have always grown up seeing their mum study or do different things. So in a way, it role models them, you know, the importance of creating opportunities for yourself and taking opportunities when they arise. So that's my journey. I never planned to be a human rights commissioner, but I received this phone call from someone one time, and they said, "Oh, we're looking for a commissioner, someone recommended you." So I applied, and here I am. Great. So there is a story that it wasn't, you know, we don't always plan things. But when you see opportunities open up, you have to be brave to take it. You know, it's applying for this role for me was like going to another planet, and arriving here is an immense privilege to be able to focus on fighting for what is right. And for our community to be better, for our country to be better, so they can all live a dignified life. It's an absolute privilege to be in this role, and I don't take it lightly. But so that's how I got here. So that's a brief version for you. I have 3 children, 2 studying at university, one's working full-time, and we live in South Auckland.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah.
No, thank you for that. And, there's a lot that resonates with me around that journey as well. But I wanted to ask, are there any of your children studying to be chemists?
My son started off doing a double chemistry and music.
Right.
But the first year, COVID hit. Yeah. And I think he only saw a lab once. Right. And then the second year, you know, it was still here. Yeah. So he's decided to take a break, and he'll go back the next semester. But
oh, that's great.
Yeah, he's fascinated by science. But I encourage them to find their passion, and then, you know, careers will come with that. So. Yeah.
Yeah, what I loved about your journey, so I've got a science background, but I'm doing accounting now as well, so it's kind of that winding path, like you said, and not necessarily going to plan ahead. I'd love to hear, because a lot of, I think, multi-ethnic community, there's an expectation, right, when we don't come from New Zealand, or parents have migrated to New Zealand, for example, there's an expectation that you follow a certain path and you achieve. So I'd love to hear kind of, you know, when you got the opportunity to put yourself forward for commissioner, for example, or when you were thinking about leaving industrial chemistry, what were those experiences like for you? What were the decision making like for you, and what was your family thinking? And I'd just love to hear some thoughts on that.
Yeah, it was really interesting. You know, it's I fortunately was only expected to succeed in education, but there was no pressure for me to succeed in a particular field. So I'd often hear from some of my young people, or I have to do accounting, or I have to do law, or I have to do this. There were no expectations like that for me. The only expectation is that I would succeed.
Right.
And so, we're back in the days when we didn't have laptops or internet. So, which is different to now. But the expectation that you succeed and you do well, not only for yourself, but your family was always there. So I knew that. And I was fortunate to have been raised by my grandparents. We prayed every morning. So we got up at 5, or it was still dark. So every morning we prayed. So you start the day reflecting on the day and appreciating what you have and thinking about others. And so that always stayed with me. We still go to church, but it's that always the ability to appreciate and to look around and to think that things are possible, but then to have an aspiration for better things for others is quite embedded in my upbringing, and it's really helped in this role as commissioner, because you're here and you're thinking about others all the time, and you're going to think about not only the challenges, but how you overcome challenges and how you work alongside others for a better society. So those are quite significant things for me. In terms of opportunities, it's really important to have good people in your life, good mentors. I was very fortunate when I went to do my master's. I met Dame Marilyn Waring. She was, in her time, the youngest member of Parliament in New Zealand. She's a personal mentor. I don't know what it is, but she just stayed beyond being elected, was a friend, and so she's known and auntie. But to have mentors like that, who is, she's well recognized globally for her work in women's rights and unpaid work and all that sort of stuff. So I was very lucky to have, now and then you have a blessing, and she was a blessing to me. And so being a Pacific person, I often, in places where you're the only one or you're one of the few, or when I was younger, the young brown one that was there. Yes. And so we need our Pākehā brothers and sisters in those places to sort of give us a hand and help us. And so people like Marilyn and other individuals have helped me through, because we haven't had members of our own communities there, to help us through. So that's really important that you look after those relationships and respect them. Yeah.
Great. No, I do want to, because you've mentioned the mentors, one of the questions has come in is, what are some of your greatest mentors? And you've shared a little bit of that, but I do want to ask, it can sometimes be really difficult when you're walking into a room and you're the only, I've definitely been there, I know many of us will have been there. How do you kind of try and get, it sounds really kind of extractive, but how do you try and enlist a mentor to support you? Because sometimes it can feel lonely and, you're having a lot of self-doubt. Someone's asked a question about imposter syndrome. So how do you actually go about enlisting the help of a mentor?
Yeah. I've learned to always prepare. So before I go into a new situation, I try to understand who's the audience, who are the leaders in that audience, and so that I try to understand, people before I open my mouth, basically. Yeah. And part of that is about seek first to understand, and then you table your kaupapa, whatever that is. So, and that's a cultural thing that I was raised with. And certainly, like you say, when you go into a space where you're the new feature, whatever that is, we do tend to be very careful. We do tend to watch and listen to see, we scope the context as we do. But also, we have to remember that we are there for a purpose, and you must never shy away from that purpose. So when you're in that space, you're there for that reason. There's no point going to a meeting and being silent, because then you miss the opportunity to advocate, for the interests that you're there. So I always remember, even when I feel like I'm the only one out, even now as a commissioner, I'll sit in tables, and I can just sense the I don't know whether it's discomfort or whether people are sort of, not really sort of trusting in what I'm saying. That will always be there. But I attend that meeting for a purpose, and I'm attended to speak and advocate, and that's what I do.
Great.
And so it's really, really important for us, and I say that sometimes when I'm, and I say to some of my Pacific colleagues in the past, well, our silence doesn't mean we consent or we agree. Mm-hmm. And when we nod like this, it's not like we're nodding, we agree. It just means, oh yeah, I can understand the words you say. It doesn't mean I necessarily buy into your message.
Right, yeah.
But don't be silent. When you're given the opportunity, take it and use it for good. And sometimes it's really hard and you're the odd one out, but you have to try and remember that you're there with everybody else who isn't there.
Yeah.
It's why when we introduce ourselves, we talk about our mountains and our families, because we're never there by ourselves. And we always know that, but sometimes when we go into these, can I say, foreign circles or new circles, we forget that we're not alone. So it's really important that you don't lose that authenticity, that all of you that is still there. You don't have to leave that behind when you go into this new game.
No, that's really beautifully put. I've actually got goosebumps when you were saying that, because it really resonates with me around the discomfort, and I'm sure it does with those of us listening in as well. But the advice that you have around showing up and leaning into the opportunity, but also knowing why you're there, but also doing the research, because I'm a big believer in that preparation. So that's really great advice as well. I do want to switch now into sharing a little bit more about your role. We were talking earlier about what a multicultural environment and the staff that you have. Would you like to share a little bit about your role, what it entails, and I'd love to hear more about your team as well.
Yeah. So the role is to advocate for equal employment opportunities, including pay equity for everybody. One of the things that I discovered when I got into the role, we're all familiar with the talk around the gender pay gap, the need to address gender pay gap, get more women moving up the ladder, because that's the only way you're going to close the gap, and things like that. So I think New Zealand, in recent times, has really made great strides in going that. We haven't closed the gap yet, but certainly, lots of advocacy groups have fought for that, for equality and pay equity for women. So that's a great thing. I walked into that space and I came across the Public Service Workforce report. So they put out reports every year. And I noticed in there was a thing called ethnic pay gap. I had never heard of this thing called ethnic pay gap. And so I recognized that while we have made progress on gender pay gap, there's huge disparity beneath that. And so Māori, our Asian communities and Pacific communities are not at the averages that are quoted out. So there's huge disparity there. So then in 2019, the Human Rights Commission, alongside our partners from the unions and women's advocacy groups and a small group of businesses, launched the End Pay Secrecy campaign. As one way to try and address this pay inequity and I suppose expose the injustice, which is basically a violation of fundamental human rights, so equality and equal opportunity. So that's one of the things that we're doing to try and address this ethnic pay gap. And it's a big gap. I think Pacific women are the worst of it at the moment. I think the gap there is around 25-27%.
Yeah.
When the average gender pay gap is around 8%, 9%, something like that.
Yeah.
So everyone's celebrating, we're going to, but actually when you look beneath that, it's ugly. It's comparison to other countries that you wouldn't think would be first world countries. That's an embarrassment, but it's also an injustice. And so there's a lot of work, and what we're doing, we launched a Pacific Pay Inquiry last year, and a lot of the learning that's coming out of there are very similar to the struggles of our other ethnic communities. Yeah. So, we're doing our very best to translate and extrapolate as much of that learning so that we benefit everybody, not just Pacific. So a simple thing, I've lobbied government that we need to ask businesses, to require businesses to record the ethnicity of staff. Otherwise, how do they know there's no pay inequity?
Yes.
How do they know that they're lifting, that they're getting diversity not only in gender, but in cultural diversity when you're moving people up, if you don't record it? So often I'll say, we're looking at this, do you have an issue? Oh, no, we pay everybody fairly and equally. No one intends to, to discriminate until they look at their data.
Yes.
And that's when it really shows up. So there's a lot of work to be done. Some of our businesses are doing their very best to address that, to identify. KPMG is one of them. But the vast majority of businesses won't go there. It's a bit too hard.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's hard. Equality is not a big thing to ask for. So do it.
Do it. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I mean, your generation would demand it, eh? I mean, if you're looking at, you would be attracted if you see, a company that values diversity, that values you, and says, bring the whole of you.
Yeah.
That's the sort of stuff that attracts talent and retains people.
Absolutely.
Because you can choose where you go, where you pitch your talent right now.
Yes.
It's different to the generations of our parents or grandparents who came here and had to start from the ground. They would take whatever job was there. They've invested so that these generations have choices, and now you have choices. So exercise that choice.
Yeah.
That's my advice to our people. So, if you go, and that's my advice to businesses, be transparent, just be fair and be equitable, and create those staircases. Then you'll attract that talent.
Yeah. No, I love what you say around take those opportunities and actually demand for it, because I've heard so much, so I mentor lots of young women of colour in particular, and so much of what I hear is around the imposter syndrome, but also that, they've seen their parents' generation do that, be grateful for what they've got and not necessarily step up into asking or demanding, and so that's sticking around in the next generation. So thank you for encouraging stepping up and asking for it. I do want to ask you about, whether there was a point in time, because the pay gap is very, I know you've said it's something that we can just do because the company should just do it, but at the same time, if you're inside a company like many of us are, it's very difficult to actually see is that happening. I was actually having a conversation yesterday with a young woman who said, I don't know if, am I feeling this kind of barrier where they're not letting me progress or they're not paying me enough? Is it because of my ethnicity, so that invisible ceiling? Have you ever had any point where you felt that, or whether you've observed that in your role as well?
Yeah, it occurred to me personally, and I have been public about my experience. I was working for, one of my previous employers. And I was looking at the salary ranges of particular positions because I was doing some research. And I noticed, I was looking at a collective agreement, and I noticed that there was a role that's very similar to mine that wasn't on this list that had all the salaries. And so I asked my boss, oh, where's this other job? And I was told, oh, that's on another scale. It turns out that other scale was significantly higher than my job. So I basically said, that's not fair. I want to be on that scale. And I never doubted that they would that they would not address it. Yeah. And they did address it. And so, but it had to take someone like me to pick that up through my own personal research and then have the courage to confront the issue. It took some months to address it, but they did address it. But that is very different to a lot of Pacific women or people from minorities who may not have the knowledge, may not have the language, a basic thing such as the language, or enough support, shall I say, for them to take that risk. So I didn't have to worry that I'll lose my house. I didn't have to worry that I won't be able to pay the rent or that or about the groceries. So, whereas for some of us, to take that risk and possibly lose that will perpetuate the silence. Yeah. And so you continue to suffer in silence. That's right. So we have to take the onus away from people who are suffering from pay inequity and put that onus on businesses, on our employers to do the right thing. Because they are required by law to provide equal opportunities, right? Yes. It's in our Human Rights Act, it's in, so it's why is it that the onus has to be on someone who's suffering inequity to raise it? So that's one of the things, that's why we're lobbying for pay transparency. And it's, I'm very encouraged that the Workforce and Education Select Committee in Parliament have now agreed, across party, have now agreed and have recommended to government to develop pay transparency measures.
Yeah.
So that's a very positive thing as a result of this work. But I pushed them, I think it was just last week, that I made a final push for them to please require the recording of ethnicity. Otherwise, we're going to continue to progress gender, but ethnicity is going to lag. And, we need to do the right thing by everybody.
Absolutely. No, that's really important, that kind of intersectional lens as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's quite a few questions here, but I want to pick up on something that someone's just asked around what you love about the mahi that you're doing. And there's a lot of encouragement, and it seems like what you've shared really resonates. So what do you love most about the mahi you're doing?
Yeah. What I love is that you get the permission to disrupt. Because we're often raised to, we call it te olewa, which is maintain the peace. I mean, a lot of us can relate to this phrase, maintain the peace. But maintaining the peace sometimes means, continuing the silence and intervening. So this job actually gives you permission. In fact, it's your responsibility not to be silent and to be open and talk and push against, established norms, if I can use those words. And I think for people of colour, for minority groups, it doesn't matter anymore. This is not about numbers. It is not about how few we are. You're in that role to advocate. And so I never forget that. So no more silence. And if you hurt people's feelings, well, this is how it is, because you're doing your job. And you have the mandate to do it. And you have a responsibility to it. So for me, in terms of being a Human Rights Commissioner, it's the opportunity of those who are not at the table to finally be seen and be heard. And it's an absolute privilege to have that responsibility, and so I do it. And sometimes not all. We're not all unified. We're not a homogenous community. You see, you're Muslim. That's not a homogenous community. Samoans, we're not a homogenous community. So we don't agree on everything. But there are some fundamental things that we all agree. We all want a dignified life for everybody. We want a secure home. We want to eliminate child poverty. We want equal opportunity. So doesn't matter where you're coming from. We all agree on those things. And it's my role as Human Rights Commissioner to fight for that, and not fight because of my role, but that is the voice of communities who come to me and tell me what they want. So it's a real honour, but it is a responsibility.
No, thank you. And thank you for kind of fighting and coming to the table, because it really heartens me to see someone and a woman of colour kind of really being quite unapologetic and saying, yep, I'm going to fight for this and raise my voice around it. So thank you. I do, because you've touched on it a little bit, that kind of the values base that you have and what you come with it, and taking that responsibility really seriously. What is your definition of leadership, would you say, and has that changed over time? Because we've talked a little bit about coming into those foreign spaces. How do you maintain that authenticity of leadership, and do you do leadership differently, would you say?
Oh, I don't know. In terms of authenticity, so when I came, you asked me about my name, Saunoamaali'i. And so I purposely used that name. That was a name that was given to me by my grandmother's family in grandmother's village back in Samoa. And so it becomes part of my name as acknowledgement of my genealogy and who I am. Karanina is the name that was given to me by my mum, who came here to study as a journalist from Samoa, and came and heard about Anna Karenina, the book by Tolstoy. Yes. And so that's where Karanina comes from. It's a Samoan version of a Russian name or something. So I carry that. So I don't think you can try really hard to hide or something of yourself, but I think in the end you can't. you know, you're not Ryan, you're all that, everything that you are, you know, and that's, to try and not be yourself is really, really hard. So just give up, just be yourself. And so that's my advice, and that's my advice to my children. You know, my children are part Irish, part Samoan, you know, Kiwi, and I said, you are all of those things. Look in the mirror, what do you see? And so honor all of those things. And it's really important that, you know, when we go into places that where we're the odd one out, that you take pride in it. And sometimes you're invited there because you're the odd one out. And that's when I know that I'm around secure leaders. When they are unafraid to invite a different voice, a different view, and they're unafraid to be challenged. And in those circles, you know, make the most of it. That's why you're invited. If they wanted someone to be silent and to be token, you tend to sense those invites and you won't take them up. There's no waste of time.
Yeah, pick a radar for those things.
Because we, you know, we've been through so many of them, and we can sense them a mile away. But sometimes you got to go to tables where you know it would not be friendly, but you still got to go and honor the role, and you still got to speak up. Because what I find is sometimes at the end of it, they'll respect you. And some might actually come around and, can I just have a chat with you? Can we catch up? And then you progress. So you're building bridges all the time, even when there's lots of broken bridges. You've got to find a way, because what you're carrying is huge, and the expectations and the hopes is huge. And so you just got to do your thing.
It's really inspirational. Thank you for that. Well, there was a question that we wanted to ask as well, given we're talking about going into those unfriendly spaces, because you've had quite a career in the public sector. You've held roles in the Ministry for Social Development, the Ministry for Pacific Island Affairs, Tertiary Education Commission, the Auckland District Health Board. There's lots of young people watching, and you know we've got an initiative to support multi-ethnic young leaders through into those public sector roles. What advice do you have for young people who are aspiring to those roles and how to pursue those roles into the public sector? Because they are service-minded, but also they are foreign spaces that might not necessarily be friendly all the time.
I mean, it wasn't smooth sailing, my journey. So if anyone's thinking somehow I went from A to B to C, you know, I was bullied, I was racially harassed. Thank goodness I was not sexually harassed. But you know, so and you have to have your own resilience. So you know, if you have a faith, you hold on to that faith, because that will help carry you through. If you know what it's like to be loved in your home, you hold on to that. You know, you have good things. If you love gardening, make sure you have. If you love music or dancing, you know, you have all those things. You hold on to it because they will help carry you through. Always be prepared. Always be prepared. If an opportunity comes up, don't talk yourself down. Talk yourself up. You know, and especially when someone taps you on the shoulder and says, would you like to try? It means that they think you can do it. And, you know, and so I have been fortunate to have people see that in me before I've seen it myself. But because they saw it, they believed in me, that meant something to me. And so I've taken the jump as a result of it. So, you know, surround yourself with good people, good leaders. Certainly if you're in an organization, just like what you're doing, you know, gather around so you're not alone. So gather around, form little networks, and, you know, perhaps offer some support as a network, offer some support to that organization. You know, can we help you with your equal opportunities policy? Can we help design our, you know, anti-racist strategy? You know, and that's how you get involved in shaping a culture of an organization. And so that's what I advise our people to do, because if you try to do it by yourself, you can't, and you'll always feel, you know, a bit outnumbered. But certainly my travel through my career it's not smooth. But I had lots of good things around me. I still have my children, my faith, and other things. So surround yourself with that.
Yeah.
Don't drown yourself in other things that might not be helpful to you.
Yeah.
Like too much partying and stuff like that.
Yeah,
They'll get into trouble.
that might be difficult for our young ones who love to have a party. A good party is always nice as well. Yeah.
And try to avoid social media. It's very toxic at times. So I get lots of, I prefer to call them fan mails and friends.
Yes.
And so I don't read them.
Right.
Because they cut you down. So, my advice, there'll be plenty of people who will try to cut you down because you're new, because you're different. Maybe they just don't, like, why are you there, not me? There'll always be people like that. So try and avoid toxic messages going into your head, coming into your life, and just surround yourself with positive things.
Yeah. It sounds like we're going back to where we started, where you spoke about that, waking up at 5 a.m, having that family time, having that time for prayer and reflection is really important. And that's kind of resonates with me because I go back to family and my faith as well. So finding what that is for each of us by ourselves, but also it sounds like we need to come together. So that's exactly why I love what Multiethnic Young Leaders does.
Absolutely.
It's coming together and doing that.
Yeah.
We've got a few more minutes together, so I want to move into the piece around our interaction, because like you said, we're not tangata whenua to Aotearoa, and us being either tauiwi if we recognise ourselves that way, or tangata tiriti, which is a term around allyship and being really active and making sure that we are good treaty partners. How you personally relate to it, but also I'd be really curious to hear how that comes into your work as well.
Yeah. It's something that it requires you to invest in personally as well as the organisation. So the Human Rights Commission, one of its priorities is to be a treaty-based organisation, and we're on a journey. We're a journey with that. So what does it actually mean? Does it mean half our staff have to be Māori, or does it mean half our budget gets committed to Māori things? So all these things we're thinking about, we're talking about. And it is a journey. Certainly the phrase tangata tiriti, when I first heard it, I wasn't quite sure whether that included me.
Right.
So this is me reflecting as a Samoan, right? We didn't sign the treaty. We didn't steal the Māori land. So if we are tangata tiriti, do we take on that ownership of all of those things? Because tangata tiriti would appear to say that we're all equal, and we're not. So it is a term that people think about. Initially I thought tangata tiriti is about Māori and the English, people who signed the treaty. So not the French or the, or the Germans or people from Indonesia, So it's not a, so for other people it's really easy to say, oh, tangata tiriti is all of us. But through my mind, we have to really think about those terms. Absolutely, we must always honour our tangata whenua. It is their land upon which we live, and we have developed a sense of belonging. But I think we have to be really careful that we don't homogenise and in a way recolonise people who have come to New Zealand to escape that history. And so, it is a journey for our country and for the Human Rights Commission, for all of us. But absolutely, it is, we have a duty and responsibility to help make right the violations of rights that were suffered and continue to be suffered by tangata whenua. And we all do our part in that space. At the same time, we must also do our part for others who have come and now call New Zealand home, seeking opportunities, seeking peace, and seeking a better life. So it's really important.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. Absolutely, I think that responsibility really resonates with me as well. I was lucky enough to be welcomed onto the Orake Marae about a year ago now, and that experience was really important because it's really about that connection and having really like deeply thinking about and reflecting on, like you say, being on that journey to understanding, but also doing our part across the board as well. We're wrapping up in the last few minutes now, so we've had a few questions around what makes you hopeful around the future of racial relations in Aotearoa, and kind of, you know, that is some tough work that you're doing. There's some unfriendly tables that you're going in front of, so would love to hear what makes you hopeful at the moment about race relations in Aotearoa.
Yeah, I'm really hopeful because we talk about it. We talk about it openly. We don't pretend that everything is pretty. You know, I'm hopeful because we've got strong leaders in Māoridom who are very local, very vocal. You know, when I look at Parliament, you look at, you know, the makeup of Parliament, it's so diverse now. You know, lots of different ages, cultures. So New Zealand is a different country. And I think about our young people, you know, the intellectual power amongst our young people and the diversity of our young people. You know, you're the leaders, you're the shapers. And so the New Zealand that was 20 years ago will be very, very different, you know, in the next 5, 10 years. So I'm very hopeful, and I do believe that deep down New Zealand is a good country. You know, fairness does matter to us, equality, equity, those things really matter to us. And because those are kind of fundamental in what we hope and expect for each other, I'm really, really hopeful about our country. I'm quite optimistic about that. You know, people want to come live in New Zealand, as expensive as we are. You know, if we can sort that bit out. But fundamentally, you know, if we compare ourselves to, you know, some of the struggles of, say, the United States or, you know, Australia in terms of Indigenous relationships, you know, we are on our own journey, and it makes me proud that we are a Pacific nation. I was talking with someone the other day. So when I go to Australia, it feels like I'm in a sub-city of America or the UK or somewhere. When I'm here, I feel like I'm in the Pacific when I'm in New Zealand. It's all around us, you know. It's so, I'm really comfortable by that, and I'm hopeful. And that's why I'm really hopeful that we're going to close this ethnic pay gap. Because, you know, the children who are living in hardship and poverty are predominantly Māori and Pacific. If we don't address that, you know, the ethnic pay gap, we're not going to address that. And so I'm really, really hopeful for us. And I think we don't have to wait 50 years or 100 years to do this. We can do this now. We just have to think, yes, we can do it, we will do it. You know, there's stuff that one of the things that the Human Rights Commission has been working alongside others is to lobby government for modern slavery legislation. So there's a document out now for public consultation. And there's no reason why we can't eliminate that in New Zealand. We know it's happening, but there's no need for it. So there's no need for children to be starving in this country. We can change this. Like now, this generation, not in the next 10 years. Your leadership, our leadership is very hopeful and very capable.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. Unfortunately, we've come to the end of our time together and our kōrero, but thank you so much for all the wisdom that you've shared. I feel really inspired in myself, so I'm sure everyone listening will as well. I just want to wrap up by kind of covering some of the key points that you've shared. You've shared around what I really loved and appreciated was that we started with values and what grounds you, keeps you grounded, family, faith, and that it's time for reflection. But also how you've come really strongly around, you know, go up to that table, take those opportunities, and ending with we can actually do it now. It's not too hard to do it. We just kind of go ahead and do it. We can end really complex issues that are facing our nation today, you know, if we all act together as well in that togetherness. So thank you so much. I really appreciate all the time that you've given us as well. Just before we close up, I do want to acknowledge KPMG again for this space, for providing us the space and supporting the mahi of multi-ethnic young leaders. A massive thank you to all of us that have dialed in. I saw some really awesome comments and questions come through. Unfortunately, we didn't have enough time to cover all of them, but thank you so much for putting those through. Those of you who are voting up other people's comments as well, much appreciation to you as well. We want to conclude with a short karakia, but I just want to remind you that the speaker series is going on, so watch out for the next one that's coming up soon as well. So please join me in the karakia to close this space. This karakia talks about sharing clarity, reflection, and going out of this space together with respect for each other for our efforts. Pauahihiri, Porarama, Poa te whakaro, Poa te tangata, Poa te aroha, Te pau e here nei i a tātou, Mauri ora ki a tātou, Haumie, Huie, Tai ki e. Ka kite everyone.